They prepared a grave for the child, not knowing a human had refused to let fate win. Part 1. The Dying Star. The snow fell in silence over the colony of 4. It had been falling for 300 years, ever since the first landed on this frozen world at the edge of known space. They had chosen this planet not because it was beautiful or warm, but because it was quiet. They were a peaceful people who wanted nothing more than to live their lives away from the noise of the galaxy. They had built their homes beneath the ice, carved into the frozen rock with patience and care. Their cities glowed with soft blue light, powered by the heat of the planet's core. For generations, they had lived in harmony with their cold world, accepting its harsh nature as simply the way things were. There were tall beings standing nearly 7 feet high, with silver skin that shimmered like moonlight on water. Their eyes were large and dark, filled with a gentle sadness that never seemed to fade. They moved slowly, spoke softly, and never raised their voices in anger. Violence was unknown to them. War was a concept from ancient stories, something other species did in distant parts of the galaxy. They had no weapons. They had no soldiers. They had only their acceptance of whatever the universe chose to give them. And now, the universe had chosen to give them death. The plague had arrived 3 months ago on a supply ship from the outer colonies. No one knew where it had started or how it had spread so quickly. Within weeks, half the colony was sick. Within 2 months, the hospitals were full. The doctors worked quietly, doing what little they could, but they all knew the truth. This sickness had no cure. It moved through their bodies like poison, destroying them from the inside. They did not fight it. Fighting was not their way. Instead, they prepared. They wove burial shrouds from the finest cloth. They carved graves into the frozen ground. They said their goodbyes with calm voices and peaceful hearts. Death was coming, and they would meet it with dignity. Elder Counselor was the oldest among them, of 400 years, who had seen much in his long life. He had watched his people build this colony from nothing. He had celebrated their births and mourned their deaths. Now, he stood in the medical chamber of the central hospital, looking down at the smallest patient in the ward. Her name was, and she was only 6 years old. She lay on a bed of soft white cloth, her small body barely visible beneath the thermal blankets that kept her warm. Her silver skin, once bright and shining, had turned dull and gray. Her breathing was shallow, each breath a struggle that made her tiny chest rise and fall with painful effort. The machines beside her bed beeped softly, tracking her fading life. Was the last child born to the colony? For reasons the doctors could not explain, no children had been born in the 5 years since her birth. She was precious beyond measure, the hope of an entire people. And now, that hope was dying. Her parents had already passed. They had been among the first to catch the plague, and they had gone quietly, holding hands as they took their final breaths. Had been too young to understand what was happening. She had asked for her mother, again and again, until the fever took her voice away. Reached down and touched her forehead with his long, thin fingers. Her skin was hot, burning with a fever that would not break. He could feel the life draining out of her, slipping away like water through sand. The lead physician, a named, approached with slow steps. His face showed no emotion, only the calm acceptance that all wore in times of sorrow. "We have completed the passing rites," said, his voice like the sound of wind through hollow reeds. "Her burial shroud has been woven. The grave has been carved beside her parents. Everything is ready." Nodded slowly. "How long does she have?" "She will not see tomorrow's dawn," replied. "The fever is too strong. Her body cannot fight any longer." Fight almost smiled at the word. They did not fight. They accepted. They prepared. They let go. It was their way, and it had been their way for thousands of years. "Then we will sit with her," said. "We will sing the old songs and guide her spirit to the next world. She will not be alone." Bowed his head in agreement. Around them, other medical staff moved quietly, checking on patients, adjusting machines, doing the small tasks that filled their final days. The hospital was full of the dying, and soon it would be empty. Soon they would all be gone. Looked up at the ceiling, at the ice that hung above them like a frozen sky. He wondered what would happen to their colony when the last of them was gone. Would anyone remember them? Would anyone know they had existed at all? He was still thinking these thoughts when the ground shook. The tremor was small at first, just a gentle vibration that made the medical equipment rattle. Then it grew stronger and stronger still, until the walls themselves seemed to groan with the force of it. Grabbed onto's bed to steady himself, his old heart racing with sudden fear. "What is happening?" he called out, but no one could answer. The doctors looked at each other with confused eyes, not understanding. Then they heard the sound. It was a roar, deep and terrible, coming from somewhere above them. Something was falling through the atmosphere, burning through the frozen sky like a comet. The sound grew louder and louder until it filled the entire hospital, drowning out the beeping of machines and the cries of frightened patients. And then silence. Stood very still, his hand still resting on its bed. The child had not woken. She was too deep in her fever dreams to notice the chaos around her. Perhaps that was a blessing. One of the younger came running into the medical chamber, his silver skin pale with shock. "Elder," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "Something has crashed. A ship. It came from the sky and crashed into the eastern ice fields." "A ship," repeated. "What kind of ship?" "We do not know. It is small, badly damaged. But Elder," the young paused, his dark eyes wide with an emotion could not name. "There is someone inside, someone alive." Felt something stir in his chest, something he had not felt in a very long time. Curiosity, wonder, perhaps even hope. "Take me to this ship," he said. They walked through the tunnels of ice, past the homes of the dying and the empty rooms of the already dead. The colony was quiet, so quiet that could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the frozen walls. He thought about lying alone in that hospital bed, waiting for death to take her. He thought about the grave that had been carved for her, the shroud that had been woven, the songs that would be sung. And he thought about the stranger who had fallen from the sky, alive against all odds, in a galaxy that seemed to have forgotten them. When they reached the crash site, saw the ship for the first time. It was small, barely large enough for a handful of passengers, and it had been nearly destroyed by the crash. Smoke rose from its broken hull, mixing with the falling snow to create a gray mist that hung over the ice like a ghost. Standing beside the wreckage, supported by two workers, was a creature had never seen before. It was shorter than maybe 5.5 feet tall, with strange pink skin and dark hair that stuck out in wild directions. Its body was wrapped in a torn uniform, stained with blood and oil. Its face was covered in cuts and bruises, one eye swollen shut, lips cracked and bleeding. But the other eye, the one that still worked, burned with something did not recognize. It was not peace. It was not acceptance. It was something fierce and wild, something that refused to look away from the destruction around it. The creature looked at, and it spoke in a voice rough with pain. "I am Park," it said. "I am human, and I need your help." Stared at this strange being, this human, and felt the universe shift around him. He did not know it yet, but everything was about to change. They prepared a grave for the child, not knowing a human had refused to let fate win. Part 2. The Stubborn Stranger. Park should have been dead. 3 days ago, his ship had been traveling through a quiet sector of space, carrying medical supplies to a distant human colony. There were 5 people on board, including who served as the ship's medical officer. They had done this route 100 times before. It was supposed to be simple. It was supposed to be safe. Then the gravity well appeared. No one saw it coming. One moment they were flying through empty space, and the next moment the ship was spinning out of control, pulled toward something invisible and impossibly strong. Alarms screamed. Lights flashed. The captain shouted orders that no one could follow. Remembered the sound of metal breaking. He remembered the feel of his body being thrown across the room like a toy. He remembered the faces of their eyes wide with fear as the ship tore itself apart around them. And then darkness. When he woke up, he was alone in an emergency shuttle. The main ship was gone, destroyed by the gravity well along with everyone he had known. The shuttle's computer had launched him automatically, following its emergency programming, saving his life even as his friends died. For 2 days he drifted through space, running out of air and hope. He had no way to call for help. His supplies were almost gone. He knew, with the calm certainty of a man who has faced death before, that he would not survive. Then the shuttle's sensors found the planet. 4 appeared on his screen like a blue-white jewel, shining in the darkness of space. The computer said there was life down there, intelligent life, a colony of some kind. Did not care who they were or what they wanted. He only knew that the planet meant a chance, however small, to live. He crashed hard. The shuttle's engines failed during entry, and he came down fast and rough, tearing a long scar across the frozen surface of the world. The impact broke 3 of his ribs and split his head open. When he crawled out of the wreckage, blood running down his face, he expected to collapse and die in the snow. Instead, he found They came to him slowly, carefully, their tall silver bodies moving through the snow like ghosts. They spoke in a language he could not understand, but their translator devices quickly learned his words. They wrapped him in warm cloth and carried him to their underground city. And there, in the blue glow of their frozen home, they told him the truth. They were dying, all of them. A plague was moving through their colony, killing them one by one, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. They welcomed not as a survivor but as another victim. Soon, they said, the sickness would take him too. It was simply the way of things. Listen to their words with growing confusion. They spoke of death so calmly, so peacefully, as if it were nothing more than a change in the weather. They had no anger, no fear, no desire to fight. They had accepted their fate completely. It was the strangest thing he had ever seen. "Take me to your hospital," he said, after they had treated his wounds and given him food. "I want to see the sick." Elder, who had become his guide in this strange world, looked at him with puzzled eyes. "Why? There is nothing to be done. The physicians have tried everything." "Then let me try something new," replied. Agreed, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of politeness. He led through the winding tunnels of ice, past homes where families sat together in quiet resignation, past workshops where craftsmen continued their work even as the plague took their strength. They did not stop living just because they were dying. They simply lived more slowly, more carefully, treasuring each moment they had left. The hospital was a large chamber carved deep into the rock, filled with beds of soft white cloth. Hundreds of lay there, their silver skin dull and gray, their eyes closed in fever sleep. Doctors moved among them, checking their conditions, giving them water and medicine, making them comfortable as they waited for the end. And in the corner, in a small bed surrounded by beeping machines, lay. Walked toward her without thinking, drawn by something he could not explain. She was so small, so fragile, her tiny body almost lost beneath the blankets. Her face was peaceful, but her breathing was rough and uneven. The machines beside her showed numbers that understood too well. She was dying. She had hours left, maybe less. "Who is this?" he asked. Stood beside him, his old eyes filled with sadness. "Her name is. She is the last child born to our colony. Her parents died 3 weeks ago. We have prepared her grave beside them." "You've prepared her grave," repeated slowly, as if the words did not make sense. "She's still alive, and you've prepared her grave." "It is our way," explained gently. "We do not wait for death to catch us by surprise. We prepare, we accept, we let go." Stood very still, looking down at the dying child. He thought about his own world, about the millions of humans who had faced death and refused to accept it. He thought about the doctors who worked through the night, the scientists who spent their lives searching for cures, the ordinary people who held on to hope even when all seemed lost. He thought about his mother who had fought cancer for 7 years before finally winning. He thought about his father, who had spent those 7 years working 3 jobs to pay for her treatment, never once giving up. He thought about himself, as a young boy, praying every night for a miracle that everyone said would never come. The miracle had come. His mother had lived. She was still alive today, back on Earth, tending her garden and waiting for her son to come home. "No," said suddenly, his voice firm and strong. Blinked in confusion. "No, I do not understand. I don't accept this." Turned to face the elder, his one good eye burning with that fierce light that had startled at the crash site. "This child is still alive. Her heart is still beating. Where I come from, that means there's still a chance. But the physicians have said. The physicians have given up." His voice rose, echoing through the quiet hospital. Several doctors turned to look at him, their faces showing the first signs of alarm they had felt in months. "They've accepted death before death has even arrived. That's not medicine. That's surrender." Took a step back, genuinely startled by the human's passion. "You do not understand our ways. We have lived like this for thousands of years. Acceptance brings peace. Fighting brings only suffering." "Maybe," admitted, his voice softening slightly. "But sometimes suffering is worth it. Sometimes fighting is the only thing that makes sense. And right now, looking at that little girl, I can't just stand here and watch her die." He turned away from and walked toward the hospital's main storage area. The doctors watched him with wide eyes, not understanding what he was doing. He began opening cabinets, pulling out medicine bottles, reading labels, searching for anything he could use. "What are you doing?" one of the doctors asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm going to save her," said, without looking up. "I'm going to figure out what's killing her and I'm going to stop it. I'm going to give her a chance to grow up, to see the stars, to live the life she deserves." "But that is impossible. The calculations show." "Then your calculations are wrong." Finally turned to face them, a bottle of medicine in each hand. "Listen to me. I'm not asking for your help. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm just asking you to stay out of my way. Give me 3 days. If I fail, you can bury her in that grave you've already dug. But until then, I'm going to fight for her. That's what humans do. We fight." The doctors looked at each other, uncertain and afraid. This was completely outside their experience, completely against everything they believed. Fighting fate was not just foolish. It was almost immoral. It showed disrespect for the natural order of things. But there was something in the human's eyes, something fierce and wild and strangely beautiful, that made them hesitate. Finally, Elder stepped forward. He looked at for a long moment, studying his strange pink face with its cuts and bruises, its determined expression, its absolute refusal to surrender. 3 days, said softly. "We will give you 3 days." Nodded once sharply and turned back to his work. Behind him, they watched in silence, not knowing that they were witnessing the beginning of something that would change their world forever. The grave they had prepared for stood empty in the frozen ground above them, waiting for a body that Park was determined it would never receive. They prepared a grave for the child, not knowing a human had refused to let fate win. Part 3, Against the Current. The first night was the hardest. Park sat beside his bed, surrounded by machines he barely understood and medicines he had never seen before. His broken ribs ached with every breath. His head throbbed where the cut had been stitched closed. His one good eye burned from staring at data screens for hours without rest. But he did not stop. He could not stop. The plague was unlike anything he had encountered in his years as a medical officer. It attacked this nervous system, shutting down their bodies piece by piece like someone turning off lights in an empty house. First, the small muscles stopped working, then the larger ones, then the organs that kept them alive. It was slow and cruel and absolutely deadly. The doctors had tried everything they knew. They had given the patients medicine to slow the plague spread. They had used machines to support their failing organs. They had even tried ancient healing rituals passed down through generations. Nothing had worked. The plague just kept moving forward, patient and unstoppable. Studied their research notes, their test results, their failed experiments. He could see what they had done wrong, but he could also see why they had done it. The thought in straight lines. They tried one thing, and when it failed, they accepted the failure and tried something else. When everything failed, they accepted that too. Humans did not think like that. Humans looked at a problem from every angle. They combined different ideas in strange ways. They broke rules that seemed unbreakable. They did things that made no sense just to see what would happen. That was what did now. He went back to his crashed shuttle and pulled out everything that might be useful. Medical supplies, chemical compounds, electronic equipment, even food packages that contained ingredients he could break down and reassemble. He carried it all back to the hospital, ignoring the pain in his ribs, ignoring the blood that seeped through his bandages. They watched him with fascination and horror. They had never seen anyone work so hard, push so far, refuse so completely to rest. It seemed unnatural to them, almost frightening. How could anyone drive themselves like this? How could anyone want something so badly that they would destroy their own body to get it? On the second day, Elder came to the hospital to check on him. Was bent over a table covered with equipment, his hands moving quickly as he mixed chemicals together in precise amounts. His face was pale and drawn, covered with sweat despite the cold air. He had not slept at all since arriving at the hospital, and it showed in every line of his body. "You are killing yourself," said quietly, standing a few feet away. Did not look up. "I'm fine." "You are not fine. You can barely stand. Your wounds are bleeding again. If you continue like this, you will collapse." "Then I'll collapse." His voice was flat, without emotion. "But not until I've done everything I can." Moved closer, his dark eyes filled with something that might have been concern. "Why? Why do you do this? She is not your child. We are not your people. You owe us nothing. Why would you sacrifice yourself for a stranger?" For the first time, stopped working. He stood very still, his hands resting on the table, his head bowed slightly forward. When he spoke, his voice was soft and rough, like sand scraping against stone. "When I was 8 years old, my mother got sick, cancer. The doctors said she had 6 months to live, maybe less. They said there was nothing they could do. They said we should accept it and prepare for the end." He paused, remembering, waited in silence. "My father didn't accept it. He sold our house. He borrowed money from everyone he knew. He took my mother to hospital after hospital, doctor after doctor, trying to find someone who could help. Everyone said he was crazy. Everyone said he was wasting his time and money on false hope. But he didn't listen. He just kept fighting." Turned to face, and the elder saw tears shining in his good eye. "It took 7 years. 7 years of surgery and medicine and treatment, 7 years of hopping and praying and refusing to give up. But she lived. She beat the cancer. She's still alive today, back on Earth, waiting for me to come home." He wiped his eye with the back of his hand and turned back to his work. "That's why I do this. Because someone once did the same for me. Because I learned when I was 8 years old that fate is not something you accept. It's something you fight. And sometimes, if you fight hard enough, you win." Stood in silence for a long time, thinking about the human's words. They went against everything he had ever believed, everything his people had built their entire culture around. Acceptance was sacred to the. It brought peace, harmony, freedom from suffering. Fighting was primitive, dangerous, a path that led only to pain. But looking at this strange creature from another world, this broken and bleeding human who refused to stop working, felt something shift inside him. A tiny crack appeared in the wall of acceptance he had built around his heart. Through that crack, something new began to flow. He did not have a name for it yet. He did not know what it was. but it felt like warmth. "What can I do to help?" asked. Looked at him with surprise, then slowly he smiled. "I need access to your chemical storage," he said, "and I need some of your doctors to help me run tests. I think I've found something, but I need to move fast. We're running out of time." Nodded and turned to go. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. He said, "If this works, if you save her, what then? You cannot stay here forever. Eventually you will leave and we will be alone again." Met his eyes steadily. "Then I'll teach you what I know. I'll show you how to fight, not with weapons, but with hope, with stubbornness, with the refusal to let go." He gestured towards bed where the child still lay in her fever sleep. "Every person you save will save others. Every life you protect will inspire more. That's how humans survived for so long. We kept each other alive." Was quiet for a moment, considering. "It sounds exhausting," he said at last. Laughed, a short and painful sound that made his broken ribs throb. "It is," he admitted, "but it's worth it, trust me." Left to gather the supplies and doctors that had requested. Behind him, the human turned back to his work, his hands already moving again, his mind racing through calculations and possibilities. Outside the hospital, the snow continued to fall on the frozen world of four. The grave they had carved for waited in the ice, cold and empty. The burial shroud they had woven lay folded in a storage room, never used. And deep in the medical chamber, surrounded by machines and medicine bottles and the quiet breathing of dying patients, a human fought against fate with everything he had. He did not know if he would win. He did not know if his plan would work. But he knew one thing for certain. He would not stop trying until his heart stopped beating. That was what it meant to be human. That was what they were about to learn. They prepared a grave for the child, not knowing a human had refused to let fate win. Part 4. The fever breaks. The third night came, and with it came the end. Park had not slept in 72 hours. His body was a wreck of pain and exhaustion. His hands shook so badly that he could barely hold the instruments he needed. His vision blurred and doubled, making it hard to read the data screens. Every breath felt like knives stabbing into his broken ribs. But he was close, so close. He had figured out what the plague was doing. The pathogen attacked a specific type of cell in the nervous system, a cell that humans did not have. That was why the plague had not affected him, why he could work among the sick without becoming sick himself. His body was simply not built in a way the plague could destroy. But that knowledge alone was not enough to save anyone. He needed to find a way to stop the pathogen from attacking those cells. He needed to create a medicine that they had never imagined, using methods they had never tried. He worked through the night, mixing compounds, running tests, failing again and again. Each failure taught him something new. Each mistake brought him closer to the answer. He did not give up. He could not give up, not when life hung in the balance. The doctors watched him with a mixture of awe and confusion. They had never seen anyone work like this. They had never seen anyone refuse to accept the obvious truth that was staring them in the face. The child was dying. The machines showed her fatting. How could this human keep fighting when there was nothing left to fight for? But kept working, and slowly, impossibly, his plan began to take shape. The key was a compound from human medicine, something used to protect nerve cells during surgery. By itself, it did nothing to the plague. But when combined with a medicine that boosted immune response, something unexpected happened. The mixture created a barrier around the targeted cells, a shield that the pathogen could not break through. Tested it on samples of infected tissue. He watched through microscopes as the plague tried to attack the cells and failed. He ran the test again and again, not believing his own eyes, checking and rechecking to make sure he was not imagining things. It worked, it actually worked. By the time dawn broke on the fourth day, had created enough medicine for one dose. His hands trembled as he loaded it into an injection device. His whole body swayed with exhaustion. but his eyes were bright, burning with hope and determination. He walked to his bed and looked down at her. She was worse than before. Her breathing had become shallow and irregular. Her skin had turned almost gray. The machines beside her bed showed numbers that were dropping fast, counting down to 0. "Hold on," whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Just hold on a little longer." He injected the medicine into her arm and stepped back. For a long moment, nothing happened. The machines continued their steady countdown. His breathing continued its painful struggle. The doctors gathered around, their silver faces showing the sad acceptance they always wore at times like this. Then the numbers stopped falling. Doctor, the lead physician, leaned forward with a frown. "That is strange. The decline has paused." "Not paused," said his voice barely a whisper. "Stopped." They watched the screens together, barely breathing. Minutes passed. The numbers did not change. Then slowly, impossibly, they began to rise. "This cannot be," said his voice shaking. "This is not possible." But it was happening. Right in front of their eyes, it was happening. Vital signs were improving. Her breathing was becoming steadier. Color was returning to her silver skin, faint at first but growing stronger with each passing minute. His legs gave out, and he collapsed into a chair beside her bed. Tears streamed down his face, cutting tracks through the dirt and sweat that covered his skin. He was laughing and crying at the same time, his broken body shaking with emotions he could not control. "She's going to live," he said to no one in particular. "She's going to live." Elder pushed through the crowd of doctors and stood beside the human. He looked at the screens, at the child, at the weeping man who had fought so hard for a stranger. He did not understand what he was feeling. It was too big, too new, too overwhelming. "How?" he asked softly. "How did you do this?" Wiped his eyes and looked up at the elder. "I didn't give up, that's all. I just didn't give up." The news spread through the colony like fire through dry grass. People came to the hospital in crowds, pushing into the medical chamber to see for themselves. They stared at the child who should have been dead, the child who was now breathing easily and peacefully, her fever broken, her body healing. They stared at the human who had made it happen. Barely noticed them. He was so tired that the world seemed to swim around him, blurring at the edges. He knew he should sleep, knew his body was on the edge of complete collapse, but he could not bring himself to leave side. Not yet, not until he was sure. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, hidden behind the clouds and ice but still there, still shining. And finally, as the morning stretched toward noon, opened her eyes. They were dark and large like all eyes, but there was something new in them. A light that had not been there before. A spark of life that the plague had almost stolen forever. She looked around the room with confusion, not understanding why so many people were staring at her. Then her gaze fell on this strange pink creature sitting beside her bed with tears on his face and joy in his eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice small and rough from days of silence. Laughed, a sound of pure happiness that echoed through the chamber. "My name is, I'm a friend." "You look tired," she said, with the simple honesty of children everywhere. "I am tired," he admitted, "but I'm also very, very happy." Tilted her head, studying him with curious eyes. "Why are you happy?" Reached out and gently touched her small hand. Her skin was warm now, warm with life instead of fever. "Because you're going to be okay," he said. "Because I got to see you wake up. Because sometimes when you fight hard enough, good things happen." The child considered this for a moment. Then she smiled, a small but beautiful smile that lit up her silver face. "Thank you," she said. Nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Around them, they watched in silence, seeing something they had never seen before. A battle won against impossible odds. A life saved through sheer stubbornness. A human who had refused to let fate take a child from the universe. Elder stepped forward and placed his long, thin hand on shoulder. "You have given us something today," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Something we never knew we were missing. I do not know what to call it. I do not know how to explain it. But I feel it, burning in my chest like a fire that will not go out." Looked up at him and smiled through his exhaustion. "It's called hope," he said. "And now that you have it, you can never lose it. No matter how dark things get, no matter how hopeless they seem, you'll always know that there's a chance. That's what hope means. It means never giving up." Nodded slowly, letting the words sink into his heart. Hope. Yes, that was exactly what it was. And as the colony gathered around the child who should have been dead, as they celebrated a miracle that no one had thought possible, something began to change in the hearts of something that would transform them forever. They prepared a grave for the child, not knowing a human had refused to let fate win. Part 5: The Empty Grave. 1 week later, the colony gathered beneath the frozen sky. It was the first time in months that so many had come together outside their underground city. They stood in rows on the ice, their silver skin gleaming in the pale light, their dark eyes fixed on the small figure at the front of the crowd. Walked slowly, her steps still uncertain from her long illness, but she was walking. She was alive, and with every step she took, she proved that the impossible was possible. Beside her walked Park. The human had finally slept, after woke up and the colony doctors forced him to rest. He had slept for 2 days straight, his broken body desperately trying to heal itself. When he woke, he found himself in a soft bed in a warm room, surrounded by who wanted to thank him. The medicine he had created worked on others too. In the days since recovery had taught the doctors how to make more of it. They had given it to every patient in the hospital, and one by one, the dying had begun to heal. The plague was not gone, but it was no longer winning. For the first time in months, they were fighting back. And they were winning. Now they walked together to a place that had been prepared for sorrow. They walked to the grave they had carved for, the empty hole in the frozen ground where her body should have been laid to rest. Stopped at the edge of the grave and looked down into it. The hole was deep and dark, perfectly carved, waiting for a child who would never come. Beside it were 2 other graves already filled and covered with ice. Her parents lay there, still and silent, gone forever. "I was supposed to be with them," she said quietly. "I was supposed to die." Knelt beside her, bringing his face level with hers. "Do you wish you had?" Was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "I want to live. I want to see what happens next." Smiled and put his hand on her shoulder. "That's the right answer. That's always the right answer." Elder stepped forward, his long robes flowing behind him in the cold wind. In his hands he carried something small and round, wrapped in silver cloth. The crowd fell silent, watching. "For thousands of years," began, his voice carrying across the ice, "we have prepared for death. We have accepted it, welcomed it, treated it as a friend who comes at the end of a long journey. We believed that fighting against fate was wrong. We believed that acceptance was the highest wisdom." He paused, looking at with eyes that shone with new understanding. "We were wrong." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not something any elder had ever said. To admit that the old ways were wrong was almost unthinkable, but continued, his voice growing stronger. "This human came to us from the stars. He was broken, bleeding, barely alive. By our ways he should have laid down and died, but he did not. He stood up. He fought. He refused to accept what we told him was certain truth." Turned to face the crowd fully, his silver face fierce with emotion. "And because he refused, a child lives today. Because he fought, our people have a future. Because one human would not accept fate, we have learned that fate is not a wall that cannot be broken. It is a river that can be crossed if you are brave enough to try." He walked to the edge of the empty grave and looked down into it. Then, slowly, he began to unwrap the silver cloth in his hands. Inside was a seed. It was a sacred seed, from the gardens that the tended with such care. These seeds were only planted at times of great change, when something old ended and something new began. The last time one had been planted was 300 years ago, when the colony was first founded. This grave was meant to hold a child, said. Instead, it will hold something new, something that represents what we have learned from our human friend. He handed the seed to, who held it carefully in her small hands. Plant it, told her gently. Let this place become a garden instead of a tomb. Looked at her dark eyes asking a question. He nodded, encouraging her. Together they knelt at the edge of the grave, reached down and pressed the seed into the frozen earth, covered it with his hands, pushing dirt over it, protecting it from the cold. Will it grow? Asked. It's so cold here. It will grow, assured her. These seeds were made for our world. They find warmth where there seems to be none. They push through ice and stone to reach the light. He looked at with a smile. Rather like humans, I think. Laughed softly, feeling warmth spread through his chest despite the frozen air. The crowd began to move forward, one by one. Each carried something small, a token of change. Some carried flowers. Some carried colored stones. Some carried small lights that glowed in the dim air. They placed their offerings around the covered grave, transforming it from a place of death into something beautiful. When it was done, the grave that had been meant for was covered in light and color. It looked like a garden already, even before the seed had begun to grow. There is one more thing, said, turning to. In our oldest texts, there is a word that we thought was only legend, a word for someone who stands between death and the dying, who refuses to let fate take those it wants. He placed his hand on his chest, over his heart. The word it means the one who holds back the darkness. We thought such beings could not exist. We thought they were stories told to children, dreams that could never become real. His eyes glistened with moisture, something that rarely showed. We were wrong about that too. Felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had not asked for this. He had not expected to become anything special to these people. He had just done what any human would do, what his father had done for his mother, what countless others had done throughout human history. He had refused to give up. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice rough. You do not need to say anything, replied. Your actions have said everything. You have shown us that there is another way to live, not through acceptance alone, but through hope, through fighting for what matters, through standing up when the universe tells you to lie down. He stepped back and bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that the rarely gave. Thank you for teaching us to live. The crowd bowed as well, hundreds of silver figures bending together in the cold air. Slipped her small hand into his larger one and squeezed gently. Will you stay with us? She asked. Will you teach us more? Looked down at the child who should have been dead, at the people who should have been hopeless, at the world that should have been a tomb. He thought about Earth, about his mother waiting in her garden, about all the things he had left behind when his ship was destroyed. Then he thought about all the things he had found. For a while, he said softly. I'll stay for a while. There's still so much to learn for both of us. Smiled up at him, and in that smile saw the future, not just for this child but for all they would learn to fight. They would learn to hope. They would learn that fate was not something that happened to them, but something they could shape with their own hands. And somewhere in the frozen ground, a seed began to grow. It pushed through the ice, reaching for a light it could not yet see. It drew warmth from the planet's core, from the hearts of the people standing above it, from the hope that had been planted alongside it. It would take time. Growth always does. But one day there would be a garden where a grave had been. There would be life where death had been expected. There would be a future where only ending had been planned. All because a human had crashed on their world and taught them the most important lesson in the universe. Never give up. Never accept defeat. Never stop fighting for those you love. That was what it meant to be human. And now, thanks to Park, it was what it meant to be too. The snow continued to fall, soft and white, covering the world in silence. But beneath the ice something was growing, something that would never stop. Hope had come to fore. And hope, once planted, never truly dies.